From meeting and working with 3 presidents as mayor, to cliffhangers about floods, famous people, near disasters, and encounters with a ton of interesting characters, this is Tales from the Gem City with former Mayor Chuck Scholz. Join us for this reoccurring bonus segment. I'm History A Go-Go's host, Rob Mellon. Welcome. Our guest today is Chuck Scholz, and he's going to discuss the interesting time that he had as mayor in handling the Great Flood of 1993. Welcome, Mayor Scholz.
Thank you, Rob. I appreciate the opportunity. I wanted to put down some of the history that we all lived through back in 93 when we were challenged with the greatest natural disaster in the history of the upper Midwest. And you know, the citizens around here just, they met that challenge. It was inspirational the way folks responded.
So as mayor, you can kind of see the situation developing, but there's no way that you could have been prepared for what actually happened.
No, and hopefully we are prepared now. We're certainly better prepared in terms of flood prevention with some of the measures that have been taken. But I had just become mayor. I was sworn in May of 1993. So I'd been on the job just into my second month when on June 30th, we had this unprecedented concentrated rainfall, 6 inches in a matter of hours, overwhelmed our storm sewer system. Front Street had manhole covers just popping up in the air like tiddlywinks. The force was just incredible. We thought it was an aberration, but we soon found out that we were in for something like we had never dealt with. The key, Rob, was what was happening in Minnesota, Iowa, Wisconsin. You know, all that rain flows right by Quincy, Illinois. This was not a flood like we'd thought in the past. This was not a flood that was going to hit a crest and go down like a spike. It got up and it stayed up. Every once in a while, when a levee district would be breached, the river would drop slightly, but then it would get right back up there. So we could tell by that first week in July that this was going to be unprecedented. And at that point, I declared a state of emergency in the city of Quincy, primarily because of our 6 contracts that we have with bargaining units or city employees, because I could suspend the contracts and then just direct everybody to flood fighting. And we did that. And then we sat down, we meaning people like Rick Smith, Jerry Griesemeyer, alderman at the time, Gary Sparks, who was instrumental, Ken Cantrell headed up the street department in those days, great guy. And we said, what can we do? And that's how we got the idea of this sandbagging site. I called up Father Toll at Quincy University, and he was happy to give us the parking lot at the stadium there. And I asked Kenny Cantrell, I said, how many sandbags have you got? And he said, oh, probably 10,000. I said, how many do you need for the water department, wastewater treatment, protecting vital infrastructure for the city? He said, probably half of that. I said, well, take the other 5,000 out to the parking lot at the stadium. I'm going to go on TV and ask for volunteers. Well, I laugh now, Rob, because it wasn't too long before we had Chinooks coming in and dropping 100,000 sandbags at a time. I mean, there were actually millions of sandbags that ended up being manufactured and distributed out there. It was just an incredible volunteer response where Kirk Brown, who was Secretary of Transportation for the state of Illinois at that time, a really good guy, very helpful during the flood. He sent us 16 big IDOT trucks from McLean County, from over around Bloomington Normal, just to haul sand. They would go down to the quarry at Fall Creek from the Sycamore side. It would take about an hour round trip, and they'd come in, they'd dump these mountains of sand, each dump truck, and the volunteers would attack those with the shovels and the bags, and it was incredible to watch. I mean, you might have mom holding it and tying it off while dad was filling it, and Junior throwing it on the pile. It was really great to see, and they were so efficient that when those trucks came back after the next trip, an hour later, people were banging their shovels on the pavement out there wanting more sand. So we had industries shut down and send their employees out there. We had senior citizens making sandwiches and cutting string and kids taking around water. And of course, what happened, Rob, was as this is going on, it's becoming very evident to us that we are in danger of losing our bridge. One by one, the bridges went out on the Mississippi, and our old Memorial Bridge went out quickly. But at some point, after the Sny Levy was breached and Hannibal lost its bridge, we were the only bridge from St. Louis, Missouri to Burlington, Iowa, 200 miles. And it's at that point that I made the decision not to limit the flood fighting to the city limits of Quincy. And it was controversial. I had an alderman bang his fist on my desk and say, "You'll never send a city employee to Missouri." But that's what we had to do, Rob, because, this bridge touches down over here on top of a limestone bluff, 100 feet in the air. On the Missouri side, it runs through the bottoms.
Right.
The approach is vulnerable to that levee over there.
No question.
And that became the total focus. So we had all these people making these sandbags, and we're shipping them over to Missouri, and they're putting them out along the Fabius levee over there. And it really, I think, was going to work. I recall being interviewed on that levee on the 15th of July. We had some real touch and go moments a few days before up there at Durgan's Creek, but we thought we had it. Norman Hare, who was a hero of the flood, he ran the operation over there. He thought we had it. But as everybody knows, who could anticipate that we'd have this deranged psychopath sabotage the levee? And the next day, July 16th at 8:22 p.m., the levee broke. And, the footage was all out there on CNN. Of course, CNN, ABC, NBC, CBS had all had their satellite trucks out at the sandbagging site because it was quite a national story of here's this town that's pulling together to help their friends and neighbors. Nobody at that sandbag site, Rob, was trying to protect their own house. We were all okay in Quincy, although there was some news coverage that said Quincy University people making sandbags. They got some calls from alums around the country wondering if campus was about to be inundated. And, if that happens, then it's going to flood all the way to, Danville, right, probably.
Yeah, and I was actually working for the radio station at the time, and I got calls from all over the country. We were affiliated with CBS. So these CBS affiliates were calling, and they were saying, well, what's it like at your house? And I'm like, well, we're actually up on the bluff. The challenge is actually closer to the river and down in the bottoms in Missouri. And so, I had to explain that to them as well. But I had a question about, you mentioned all the citizens coming together. But as a mayor, how did the different parties come together to meet the challenge?
That's a great question. There was no partisanship whatsoever. I mentioned Terry Griesemeyer, who was Democratic alderman in the 1st Ward, and Rick Smith, who was Republican alderman in the 5th Ward. They not only came together in my office on a bipartisan basis to put together this sandbagging volunteer site, but the two of them actually got into a big city dump truck, and we were sending them out along with the rest of our trucks once they were full of sandbags, and they got up into Indian Graves, which is just north of Quincy Bottoms there. And we almost lost them. They got into they were trying to get down to the pump station there, and the road became inundated, and they were just guessing as to where the road was, but they made it in and out. But anyway, everybody worked together. Jim Edgar, Republican governor at the time, he basically said, whatever you need. He was wonderful, came over here himself. As I mentioned, the Illinois Department of Transportation was extremely helpful. It was a great example of state, federal, and local all cooperating together. They had a great attitude, which was basically whatever it takes, we can do that. We did run into one roadblock, though, Rob, and I know you're a member of our armed forces in the United States Army, but it was the Army. It was the Corps of Engineers. Because once we lost that levee, we didn't have a bridge for 200 miles, and we have 38% of our local economy flowing across that bridge every day from Northeast Missouri. A lot of teachers, people that work in factories, nurses aides. We needed to get those folks back across the river, and there really wasn't any way to do that. We were cut off to the east. with Interstate 72 when the levee was breached and we lost the Hannibal Bridge. And of course, we couldn't go west. So we had people camping on our side of the river. We had people coming over in helicopters, fixed wing aircraft, but obviously that was not getting the job done. And we came up with this idea for a boat shuttle. There's a guy, Bob Lump. He was captain of the excursion boat in Hannibal that's run by Captain Steve now. But Bob was licensed to transport passengers on the Mississippi. He'd been in the tourism business a long time, and he said, I can get you some big pontoon boats from Florida, and we can run a shuttle from Highway 61. We now had a 7-mile wide river. It ran from bluff to bluff.
Wow.
Now, 61 was out of the water. You could drive up and park there. And then that's where you got on the proposal for the boat shuttle. Well, IDOT and MoDOT both signed off on it, and we thought we were pretty much ready to go. Then we checked with the Coast Guard, which at that point was part of the United States Department of Transportation. It's under Homeland Security now, but it happened that Secretary of Transportation was Federico Pena, who had been mayor of Denver. So that's when I first met him, was through the U.S. Conference of Mayors. He came to Quincy. He walked out on that bridge with me, and he said, whatever it takes. So he was great, and we thought we were going to be able to do it, but the Corps of Engineers had the final say, and they said, we're not doing anything without a study, which would make sense under normal circumstances, clearly. But, of course, this was an absolute dire emergency, and we couldn't wait for that. So at this point, Rob, I called Paul Simon. Do you remember Paul Simon?
Absolutely.
United States Senator, great man. Our listeners will recall the bow tie. And Paul, I had worked for Paul Simon. I'd been his downstate political director in his last campaign in 1990 before I was mayor. And I'd called him once before already, the night the levee broke. Art Tenhouse, Lane Evans, our former congressman, a bunch of us were at City Hall trying to figure out what to do. And I needed to get the National Guard, and we didn't know how to get a hold of him. I called Senator Simon, woke him up. This is probably 3 o'clock in the morning. And he woke up Les Aspin, who was his old friend. They served in the House together, but Les Aspin was Clinton's Secretary of Defense. So it wasn't long after that when I heard the chopper land out in the parking lot in City Hall, and I had a major general come into my office with a whole staff with him. I offered him coffee. I could tell immediately he was not a happy man, and he explained that somebody had awakened the Secretary of Defense, and he had been chewed on and dispatched to City Hall in Quincy. But he turned out to be a very cooperative guy and worked very well with us, and I can't say enough good things about the Illinois National Guard. You know, I'm working with them now, Rob, because in my capacity as chairman of the State Board of Elections, we're going to have 133 Illinois men and women of the National Guard deployed as cybersecurity experts on Election Day.
That's pretty cool.
Isn't it? You fight the flood. Now they're coming to our rescue to secure the election. So, in any event, I explained to Paul what I needed. This was not a 3 o'clock call. That was the one the night the levee broke. But I caught him, and he said, this is great because I'm in Chicago, and President Clinton's going to be in Chicago, and I'm trying to get a ride back to Washington on Air Force One. So I'll try to talk to him, but if not, I will talk to a senior staff. So that was in the middle of the day. That night, Becky and I are out with our sons, Charles and Jake, at the sandbag site like everybody else. And we didn't get home till like 11:30. And remember answering machines, Rob?
Oh, I do. Yeah.
I hope some of our listeners do.
They do. I'm sure they do.
Every time you walk in the door in those days, you hit the answering machine. And the first one was about Jake's soccer game canceled because it was going to rain again. It rained every day, it seemed like that summer. And after 3 or 4 generic messages, I get, this is the White House secure voice phone operator calling for Mayor Schultz. The president wishes to speak with you immediately. And I'm like, oh my, I looked at Becky and the kids. I'm like, I can't believe it. The president called me and I missed it. We had 3 bag phones at that time. and the one that I kind of had was out at the sandbagging site where it was really needed. So all he had was my home landline. So anyway, I listened to a couple more messages. Then I get this White House secure voice phone operator. President's wishing to speak with Mayor Scholz immediately. So of course I called back, Rob, but the person answers the phone again. It's getting on to midnight. Immediately says, "What's your access code?" And I said, "Ma'am, I do not have an access code, but I'm returning the president's call," which I thought was, but she didn't believe me. And I went through.
I'm sure she's heard that before.
Well, apparently. And I said, "Ma'am, have you watched the news? Do you know what's going on out here in the Midwest with the Mississippi River?" And nothing. So I said, "Please bear with me. I am not crazy. I'm going to play my answering machine for you." And so she had to listen about Jake's soccer game. But when it came to the White House secure voice phone operator, boom, I got him. She said, "Hang on, I'm switching you to Red Crown, I think it was." But anyway, the next thing I knew, Air Force One, please hold for the president. And I get this, "Mayor, I understand you got a problem up there. I want to help you." And it was Clinton. And of course, I had in my pocket the notes I had from talking to Paul Simon earlier in the day. So I had it right there. "This is what we need to get this expedited, sir. We appreciate it." And then I'm thanking him, trying to get off the phone, really. And the president says, "Well, no, don't hang up. Your buddy wants to talk to you." Well, Paul Simon had very distinctive, deep baritone voice.
I remember that too.
He loved doing radio ads. He had a great voice for radio. And I get this, "Chuck," and I said, "Yes, Paul?" And he said, "I really fooled you that time, didn't I?" And I said, "Paul, what are you talking about?" He said, "Well, that guy does the best Bill Clinton imitation anybody's ever heard." And I said, "Please, Paul, tell me that was really Bill Clinton." He said, "That's the president. He's going to help you." And that was probably, by this time, it's midnight. So at 6 a.m., my phone rings, and it's Gary Sparks, who was my partner at City Hall and who I designated to be in charge of all flood fighting. And he says, "I'm coming by to get you. We got a meeting with the Corps of Engineers." And I said, "No, I think we got a meeting with MoDOT at 8 or something." He said, "No, we're meeting with the Corps at 7. Everything's changed." So he picks me up, and we go out on North 24th Street. I did not know that these folks were even out there now. We're 3 weeks into flood fighting here. And we go in there, and it's full of Corps engineer people, a couple dozen of them. And I think, what the hell? They've been here this whole time, and we're not coordinating on flood fighting? But anyway, there's a guy there. All these people were civilian Corps people, or civilian attire, I should say. But there's one guy there in fatigues, combat boots, had the name stenciled on his chest, sticks his hand out there, "Mayor, I'm here to get this done." And I said, "Well, how long is that going to take?" He said, "Well, I don't think we can get it started today, but how about tomorrow?" And I was floored by that. And I said, "Absolutely. Can we announce it today?" He said, "Give me 2 hours. We'll announce it." He wanted to know where we wanted to stage it. We had already figured out front in Hampshire. We've got the ramp there. We could pick people up in our buses and take them to wherever they needed to go to get to work and return them. The plan was to go right through the break in the levee created by Jim Scott's sabotage. So we announced it. I think it was, by that time, it was probably about 11 o'clock in the morning. And Becky and I got up the next morning, went to the Villa Catherine. And on that flat area there that years ago was a ball field just to the north of the castle.
Remember?
They were using that for helicopters. So we got in the chopper and we rode over and landed on Highway 61, got into this nice, big, flat pontoon boat that sat about 55 people, had a bathroom on it. And you could get your coffee and your newspaper, and folks around here that had never heard of commuting got used to it. And we rode that boat right down US 24 because that way they wouldn't run over anything, because there were a lot of things under the water that you couldn't see.
I was helping sandbag at that time, and I remember we were down by the river, or down by the bottoms, and we got on these little boats and we'd go to where sandbags were needed. And I remember being on one of these little boats, and looking down and seeing a stop sign completely under the water. And I'm like, that's pretty amazing. I could see the stop sign barely, but it was completely under the water. So I know what you're saying about the hazards.
And all of the people that knew about the hydrology there said that is going to take a long time to drain out the Fabius Drainage District. You know, we're talking about middle towards the end of July, but we knew all along, Rob, that by October, we really needed to be back open for fourth quarter retail, but probably just as importantly, to be able to run the largest soybean crushing plant in America. And they got to get those beans, and a lot of them come across that bridge. So that was a big thing for us. But in any event, we ran that boat shuttle, and for 71 days, people rode it. And it worked, and it was great. And I think it was a great example. I wish I knew who this young man was. He had charts. He had a boat waiting down at the river. I said, what about MoDOT? He said, they're in a chopper on their way up here right now. I mean, this guy was totally in charge and could really kick whatever needed to be done. And it was a great example of coming to our rescue. And that was really one of the factors in President Clinton choosing to visit Quincy the day after his last State of the Union address, which will be another podcast. Since I got to hitch a ride on Air Force One, that time I got to be in the forward cabin with him. But they wanted to do something where Clinton had really had some impact, and he definitely did come into our rescue in the flood of 93. You know, I mentioned getting those soybeans across the river. So if you fast forward to October, we went down to 6th and Jersey and started another sandbagging site and went back across the river, put bags on either side of the shoulder of US 24, put some plastic on top. They put some pea gravel on that, and they pumped out what was left. Of course, you couldn't get it all the way down, but you could drive through it. And actually, the water was higher on either side of the highway. But we got those trucks back across, and we reopened the bridge. And when we pushed the barricade aside, I was there as mayor to welcome the first group back to Quincy. I gave them a key to the city, and I said, just out of curiosity, where are you headed? And where do you think people in Northeast Missouri couldn't wait to get to after 71 days? Jim City Pizzeria.
They still do that today.
They do. I go in there and say, who are all these people? I know everybody in Quincy, but they're all from Ewing, you know. They wanted to go to County Market and Jim City Pizza. So, and, you know, of course, the recovery went on from there. But I really believe that infusion that we experienced in our retail market with all that pent-up demand, plus everything that had to be purchased to rebuild, you know, all of this hardware and carpet, and some of that was insurance money, and some of that was FEMA money, and some of that was World Council of Churches and private, but our numbers were off the charts. So it shouldn't have surprised me the following spring when I got a call from Atlanta from the guy that wanted to locate a Home Depot on East Broadway. They were looking at our numbers, and they had been in all metropolitan areas, and we were going to be their first rural store, and we ended up doing that, which of course spurred a lot of other development. It wasn't that long before you had Lowe's, Menards, Sam's, and everything else that's been driving our sales tax revenues.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
But in any event, yeah. I don't know what I left out.
You know, the interesting thing is, I don't think people realize what the president actually does in that regard, that there are challenges every day that he has to meet, or she eventually. But and this is just a good example how it doesn't matter what part of the country you're in, the challenge is met, Americans need help, and the president's there to lend whatever help the federal government can provide.
Well, that's right. And Senator Simon doing his part is, unfortunately, you know, I mean, he would have wanted to help Quincy no matter what. It's just, I knew his cell phone number, you know, but whatever. I think it's a great example of everybody working together because Jim Edgar came over, and he was at the sandbag site, and he gave me pretty much a blank check. And even after the flood and the rebuilding, and FEMA was really, really good to us because, a lot of that stuff, I remember the night I sent the firefighters down to Gardner, Denver. It's the equivalent of a 5-alarm fire. You call in the off-duty shifts, but it was coming in. See, Gardner, Denver wasn't protected. They are now, but they didn't have the 35-foot levee that South Quincy does. They had about, they'd figured it they had about 29, but they built it up to maybe 32. It went over 32 3 times, though. So we were all down there just trying to do whatever it takes. But, later on, you realize you've called out the off-duty shifts. That's about $48 an hour expense to the city. But FEMA reimbursed us, as they should have. So in the long run, there's so many benefits of the flood. You think about all that publicity of, I used to tell people when I'd be doing economic development, they'd say, "Oh, yeah, I remember seeing Quincy in the flood." I'd say, "Yeah, that's your workforce. Dedicated, dependable people show up to help their friends and neighbors, or maybe people they don't even know, but they just want to do the right thing. That's why you ought to be in Quincy." It was a great selling point for us, that and the fact that, we held South Quincy. It's probably that had just been raised to 35 feet a couple of years before that, thanks to then Congressman Durbin. But that's probably the only major industrial levee on the upper Mississippi that wasn't breached. So now you've seen hundreds of millions of dollars of investment down there from ADM and Fitzpatrick and Prince Agra, all of that knowing they want to be down by the river, of course, and get the advantage of barge transportation, but they're afraid of being flooded. You come to South Quincy, and we got 500-year flood protection. We can prove it because we survived the flood of '93.
That's right. And I think it's such a good lesson for us today as we face different challenges, but sometimes challenges bring opportunity as long as you work together. And
that's exactly right.
That was such a good example.
Right. You have to look at it as an opportunity, and you have to realize that the river doesn't separate us; it brings us together. That's how we started the Tri-State Summit. Was after the flood, we finally all realized, these rivalries. Hey, if a company goes to Palmyra, that's going to be good for Quincy. Company comes to Quincy, that's good for Palmyra. That Hannibal, Keokuk. So that's when we decided to get everybody in one room, especially on river issues, where we all have a common agenda there, and just come to a consensus on. And now we got 6 senators that we can appeal to, and a Mississippi River Caucus in the House. But yeah, the Tri-State Summit came directly out of the cooperation from the flood.
Well, I'd like to thank our guest today, Chuck Scholz, for the amazing story of the flood of '93, and I know I can't wait for the next story. So what's the next story going to be on?
Well, I've thought about presidential campaigns in Quincy since I've experienced quite a few over, but I also want to tell the story of the President Clinton's visit to Quincy, kind of the behind the scenes. And of course, I was fortunate. I was attending the Conference of Mayors in Washington, so they invited me to ride with the president out on Air Force One. And then when I got on the plane, and I was in this very nice sort of, I'd describe it as like a first class compartment there, along with members of the congressional delegation. But I had a young man from the Air Force come and get me and take me up to the forward cabin because Bill Clinton, before he gets to Quincy, he wants to know everything about Quincy. And as far as I was concerned, he was asking the right guy, Rob. I gave him the whole John Quincy Adams and John Wood and City of Refuge. So maybe we'll do that one next.
Absolutely. Well, thanks, Mayor Scholz, and join us again next time. And of course, you can get the podcast on any of the directories. You can find it on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcast, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and it's expanding every day. So get the podcast, and I'm looking forward to our next conversation with former Mayor Chuck Scholz.
Yeah, it's time to go home. Yeah, it's time to move on now. And it's
Bye.